Alright, I'm making this video because I've gotten some comments about what what healing practices I've used. I haven't actually used any like established practice. They did try in my therapy in the 10 months I was there. My therapist tried the one where the inner family, I think it's called. It's where she speaks to the different aspects that are expressing, because a lot of what we experience is fragmentation of our personality, of our identity. And there'll be parts of us that live over here and parts of us that live over here, and they don't get along because of the fear and the contrast barriers between them. The one thing I want to stress, and this was important to me, is that what you're experiencing is not what happened. What you're experiencing is the brain's recall of what happened. It's important to realize that what you're doing is, in the process of healing from the experience, you're remapping your brain. It's a physical, functional thing that's happening. You're remapping your brain. The brain makes associative connections. A neuron may trigger into different parts of your brain to form this pattern of experience. So when you focus on the present moment, you are putting a new pattern on top of that and breaking the connections the old pattern had and establishing new connections. That takes some time, depending on how deep, how well worn the old patterns are. Taking a generalized approach is kind of sometimes a good thing. Now, I spent a lot of time digging through my past, because it was, at the point I broke in late August 2019, my past was this dark, blurry, blank space in a lot of places. It didn't have any sense of coherency and was contexted by all the erroneous beliefs that I had come to believe from growing up gay and the abuse, and then consequently the psychotic break. So I actually, for me, and this was for me, because I kind of hurt myself doing it emotionally, because I was really forcing myself. And I stress that having a therapist through this is advantageous. I mean, a human being can do it on their own, but to have a therapist to counter, to help you see when you're trapped or locked in a pattern of the old. So I went and I dug through my past, and I went year by year trying to recall it. Objectively, it's often subjectively. You can't remember your childhood without remembering it through the eyes of the child you were. It's very difficult, but you can eventually come to understand it and set it aside and start to see it from the adult point of view, realizing that the child you were was just a child or a young man. So I spent a while just going year by year, trying to recall as much as I could of my life, so that I could have the framework to re-see it in a more objective way, a more compassionate way. It's difficult because a lot of times it involves so much self-hate. And again, when you recall something, you recall it from the point of view you had. And it takes some time to separate it out and see it accurately. So I went through my entire life to the present moment, year by year, recalling it, taking notes, remapping it. And slowly, I began to change the dark, twisted, and confused past and see it in a more objective light, brighter, compassionate way. God, every time I say that word. Now, like I said, I recommend that you have a therapist to help you with this, because they'll be able to maintain that objectivity as you go through it. Because sometimes what you experience is going to be overwhelming and painful. Now, generally speaking, what I did, healing-wise, was, well, let me explain. In late August 2019, I had a break. The reason I had that break, I had the post-traumatic stress and the underlying trauma, and I carried it for years. But I kept it at bay and in place by a structure of personal identity that was based on self-hate and fear. And that personal identity, that basic sense of who am I in the world, kept all of that stuff in a place that allowed me to function. It didn't feel good, it hurt, but it allowed me to function. In late August 2019, the only way I can describe it is I pulled the pin that held that identity together. I had spent so long focusing on the ideas of unconditional love that it loosened up a lot of the self-hate and fear. And I pulled, I think, the last pin of fear and that identity I had fell apart, broke apart. So now there was nothing holding everything at bay, keeping it contained, and it all just started to express the post-traumatic, the triggering into feeling and stuff, and it became so overwhelmingly emotional and confusing because nothing about my life made sense anymore. So the first year of that was just trying to get the ship upright. But, yeah. One of the things I did first and foremost was to focus on the compassion. The core issue we deal with is shame. And the only way to address that shame is through compassion. You can't fight it. You can't bury it. You can't remove it. You have to heal it. And the only way to heal it is through a compassionate understanding that you never asked for any of it. That you did the best that you could. I had done something once. I tried to focus on something that in the present moment I could find a lot of compassion for. To feel that compassion, to build it up within me, and then I turned it back on myself. When I was young, and when it all happened. And as you can see, there's still feelings of shame. But I've diminished it down. But focusing on the self-compassion is key and important and will help with the rest of it. Dealing with the post-traumatic stress, which I never even realized I had until I experienced it. And even took a while to realize what it was. I had two major feelings, major patterns that would trigger the word. The word trigger is really just a layman term for the associative nature. You know, for me, a lot of the triggering was through music. I would listen to music from a period of a type, and it would draw me into a place or I can't even remember what, or even begin to describe what triggered the other. So the two main patterns I had, the first one I called the panic. And basically what would happen is my entire body and mind would freeze up in a panic. The first time I experienced that threw me for a loop. I couldn't hardly move. I got as far as the bottom step of our stairs, and then I was stuck with my hand gripping the handrail, and I couldn't move, and I was hyperventilating, and fortunately my wife heard me, and she called the therapist's office, and one of the therapists talked me out of it. But it took 2 days to recover from that, because as soon as you experience that intensity, now your whole insides are on alert, because they don't want to experience it. You don't want to experience it again, so you're like just sitting there wondering, waiting for it to happen. But I started to realize when I experienced the panic, there was one particular moment I remember where I started experiencing, I'd lay down in bed, and I just kind of balled up and held myself. And I remember experiencing like two me. I didn't even realize it was two me's at the time. There was the experience of the panic, and that was where I was living, but then I was experiencing this like understanding ness that was trying to help me in a sense. And it took a while to realize that was also me. It was everything that I had started learning, and everything that I had taught myself about unconditional love was still there too, and it was trying to help me. And I say it because it was so distinctly and contrastedly like two different things. But then I started to realize that if I could start identifying with the other part, not the part that was panicking. And then I could become the person who was helping to heal that. Because I didn't have to live in it. And then it would start to diminish. I would experience it. I would focus on the present moment. Oftentimes, I would just grip something and focus on a point. And I would just allow myself to experience everything. And then when I would feel the part of me that was approaching it from a healing point of view, I would then focus on that and allow the panic part to just play through. And then eventually that's what it became. I would experience it, and I'd be like, you know, it's okay. You know that you're okay. Just let it play through. Don't think it. Don't worry it. Just focus on where you're at and what you're doing. And a lot of times it's when I was driving. So I would just focus on the road in front of me. I would grip the steering wheel, and I would just patiently wait for it to play through, because it is the brain. It's not a monster attacking. It's not some mysterious thing way off there that suddenly gets you. It is your brain's wiring to a pattern of experience. And depending on how long you've allowed yourself to experience that and believing it to be the reality and truth is how long it's going to take for it to eventually diminish. But it does. It does. It took some time. And each time I experienced that panic pattern, there was always an edge that was better. Even to the point that I remember it triggering up inside a store I was in. And I had ways to deal. I had a coping, if you can see it. My hand would start doing this because it would allow me to focus all the feelings through my arm into the action so that I could maintain focus on where I was and interact with people. That one was a bitch too, because I'd be there, and as soon as you start to feel it, now you're in the mode of, now I'm looking stupid, or people are going to start staring at you. And then you got that too, which didn't help. But eventually it started to soften up enough that I could maintain the focus of where I was, what was going on, that it would be okay. And eventually it would pass, and I'd be, and then it would pass, and I would have that affirmation to say, yep, okay, so the next time that happens, I'm even more confident to let it just play through. And now it's at the point where something will happen, my hand might start going or something, and I'll realize, oh, it's that pattern still playing through underneath the present moment, within the present moment, because I've gotten to a point now where I can maintain a focus in the here and now some of the depression stuff does still kind of creep up and get in the way, but because the other pattern I experienced too, the two of them that were the worst, that panic one because you just get all confused about what's going on, and the other was just horribly cold and empty and dark and deep sense of loneliness and hopelessness. And oh man, and I didn't, the first time I experienced that one, I took a nap. I woke up with George Harrison's song, Give Me Love, going through my head. Now I didn't own it. I don't remember listening to it over and over, but for some reason, it was a part of this. So I woke up with that, and I'm like, that is weird. So my first instinct is, let's go to YouTube, bring it up, and start listening. And I did, and oh, mistake. Maybe. And suddenly that feeling just overwhelmed me, and it was so horrible. And I'm sitting at my desk feeling so goddamn alone and so cold and empty and sad and hopeless. And I'm at the same time telling myself I have a wife and kids, and I'm in the house where, and they're all around, and yet I'm feeling, and it was again that same kind of contrast. And I was like wanting to pound my head against the wall, because I'm like, why? Why would I even want to feel? It didn't make sense why I was feeling it. I mean, I understand where it originates from. It originates from the time and near the moment I attempted suicide. Because at that point in my life, I was thinking about my childhood so extensively. Wishing, the words that keep coming up in my mind. Or I just want to go home. Meaning I just want to go back to when it was easy. When I had hope, when it was... And so I would listen to a lot of music that took me back to my childhood. ELO, especially. And I didn't realize I was associating all that pain and emptiness. So when I first heard, and I realized too, it was not just George Harrison's song, it was any song from the late 70s that was of a certain ilk, certain folkiness, would pull me, bring that feeling up. Now I'm probably going to have to edit that. I think I just went through a whole lot of unnecessary, superfluous things. But the point, in fact, in all of that is that I started to see the contrast between me being here and the experience of that pattern, because that's what it is. Simply a pattern. The brain triggers, and I noticed this for myself. I have the one video, I think it's called Just to See, and I can recall now how that happened. It was one thing would trigger in, I triggered into the loneliness, which then starts to cascade through the brain into all the other, and it ended up with the loneliness surrounded by the panic. And at that time, you're basically screwed. As far as the only thing you can do is just find a safe place to hide for a little bit until it passes. But the important thing is that to notice the contrast between the present moment and the experience, to focus on the present moment part, because when you focus on the pattern stuff from your past, if you focus on it, all you're doing is keeping it up and alive. But if you just let it play through, don't fight it, don't do anything except for focus on the present moment, focus on the self-compassion, focus on the fact that you're safe. That is so underlyingly important, realizing that a lot of what you're feeling is that feeling of unsafe. I'm not safe, I'm not safe. Even though you might not recognize it. But focusing on the self-compassion that you never asked, help heal that shame part of it, help to detach from the shame, to focus on safe, to help support your sense of confidence. Because when you get hit by a pattern like that, and then you get through it, it leaves you shaken. And like I said, in the beginning, it took 2 days to get past that part. The event might last a half an hour to an hour, and it would take 2 days to let it go. But that diminishes. And that diminishes more fundamentally when you focus on the compassion at the present moment safe. Because that's the basic idea. You're trading the real now for the past. And you have to do that through a constant experience of it, diminishing the old as you focus on the present. Which brings me to the very simple notion. Why the phrase, just get over it, let it go, rubs us all so wrong. Because first and foremost, that's what we're trying to do. That is our goal. And as I've put it somewhere else in other places, people would say, don't dwell on the past. I never intentionally tried to dwell on the past. You have to remember that those of us who have been through this situation, the event of it, or the time, or the period of time of it, creates detriments to our identity. It creates the shame, the unsafe, and our self-worth it tanks. Now everything else that we do afterwards is now colored and tainted by that sense of identity. So every event you experience after that moment, after the period of the actual abuse, is now colored. And now those events become associated to it as well. And if you live long enough with it, so much of your life becomes associated to it. So when you say don't dwell on the past, you don't. The past is dwelling on you through these multitudinous, subtle associated triggers, through your sense of identity, through what you meet in this moment, how you would have handled it with the old feeling of you, and how you're trying to handle it now with a new sense of who you are. You have to have patience with yourself. Oh, you have to. I consider myself relatively intelligent. And when I saw what the truth was, I was like, all I got to do is apply myself and push, and I'll be healed in a month. Been 3 years and I still experience some of it. So patience with yourself is so important. Do not beat yourself up ever. You spent the time from the abuse to now beating yourself up, not giving yourself the benefit of the doubt, giving everybody else the benefit. It's now time for you to err on the side of you if you're going to do something to an extreme. Overkill, the compassion and understanding for yourself, because you deserve it. It is your right to have. And I know sometimes it is hard to see that. We are so conditioned to believe that we don't deserve and that we're not worth. But in time you will know for sure. And that will help snowball your recovery and your healing. That's the general approach. And I did read this too. Mind you, none of this is clinical, save for what I learned from my therapist or from my group, the psychotherapist in the group, who would often do teaching on PTSD and stuff. And because PTSD, depending on the individual, will express in different ways. Some people go overboard and over-sexual, overindulgent, over-addictive, drugs, alcohol, and they go that way outwardly. But other people like myself withdraw into the tiny little safe space and then basically keep everybody there. And so it'd be advantageous to read a little on post-traumatic stress in your dealing with it. Ultimately, it's going to be what makes you feel better in your heart. I spent forever chasing the more tactile and sensory stuff because it was the only thing that I could experience that felt reasonably good. I mean, that's why I think certain addictions happen, because you're still dealing with this feeling inside that doesn't feel good. And you're just trying to find some way to feel good. So as you focus on the compassion and start to heal that part of yourself, the chasing does diminish. I still drink. I drank a lot as a means of self-medicating, as a means of escaping my feelings of self. I still drink, but not with the compulsion of it, not with the... Some of it's just because that's what I've always done. Some of it's because I'm getting older and my body aches at the end of the night. But it's not for the same reasons it used to be. Recognize that some things you've done in your life you're not proud of, but you also know that you were dealing. You got to have that degree of understanding, forgiveness for yourself, and if it involved another person, then just do what you can to rectify it with them. Apologize and compensate, whatever you can do if they're worth keeping in your life, all the while forgiving yourself for it, because you just didn't see, you didn't know. Now you do. So now you're trying to smooth it over and get everything right again. Forgiving yourself, again, overkill. Overkill the forgiving yourself. Because you deserve it. Because you have been dealing with extraordinary circumstance on your own. And now it's time to give to yourself. It's time to heal yourself. And the only way to heal anything is through love. You can't do it any other way. So as you begin to learn to love yourself, you'll feel lighter as you learn. And these are all learned because it's your brain. I can't reiterate that more. You're not fighting a monster. You're not fighting the past. You're fighting the patterns in your brain that just trigger into the recall of past, your body. That's a tough one too, emotions. They all have their particular memory. I have a lot of memory of coping. And it seems to make two lines of memory that seem to be in conflict. The coping memory I have says, no, everything was great, because I kept telling myself, it's your fault, so you have to just, be strong, live your life, cope with it, deal with it, I would block out this part and focus on this part. And so my visual memory, like the surface memory, is that everything was fine. And then, my mind goes, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't happening to everyone else. So it couldn't have been fine. And it took a while. It took my group, actually, to help me to recognize that what had happened to me was abuse. And fortunately, I had some contrast in this. I'll go into more in the idea of contrast. I had a friend in college who turned out to be gay, had a crush on me. And I interacted with him through all the same years. And not once did he ever do anything like what that guy did to me. Not once. And he was gay, had a crush on me. And then I realized that what that guy did was abuse. And you get confused. This is one of the suckiest ones for us. Because the experience was a body pleasure. But the experience was also an emotional, mental pain. And now you got that contrast and that conflict. Because that's how it started with me. Because I woke up with him on top of me. I woke up. And I was so close to that my young mind was in conflict over wanting to experience it and not wanting it to be him. And I consciously made the decision to let him finish. And for some reason, I thought I was locked into that. I was the kind of person that believed in when you make an agreement, you keep your word. Integrity, the integrity. And I was also locked into the idea that I had to prove myself as a good person to be liked. That came out of my deep childhood. So when I had let him, I thought I had some agreement to it. And that's what locked me into letting him. Because the second time I did it, I wanted him to stop. But I couldn't say anything because I thought it would be wrong of me to tell him to stop. Never once did I ever consider that notion that when I woke up, I had never asked him to be there in the first place. But that's the bitch of the conflict we experience, the pleasure and pain, and the confusion of allowing and the shame of believing that we asked for it, caused it. But the truth is they made a choice to initiate it. They made the decision to start it. And we just got caught up in what? Doing the best we could with what we knew what to do in the moment. Realize that. That is self-compassion. That is understanding that you were manipulated and have no reason to feel bad about yourself for it. Definitely going to have to edit this because I think I'm wandering around. So I just wanted to say something more under the compare contrast. This is more specific to my experience because of the way it was for me. But it might be a significant thing for someone else to do because I know it's helped me to a degree. And it's compare contrast a visual image. Now, when I was a kid, when I was 15, I had the one positive experience being gay, with feeling fully for a particular boy. And that locked me into seeing a boy his age as safe. And that's what it was, safe. Because after the abuse and because of other dynamics of my childhood, I learned to be afraid of men, period. My psychology was stuck at 15. So I was viewing my relationship to men from the point of view of being a 15-year-old kid and was intimidated and afraid of men. So here I am now at 55. And all I have is this memory at 15. And my present moment knowing of how I feel. And I've got this present moment wrapped in a fear of men. And so my mind is still seeing things through the eyes of the 15-year-old. And I got this gulf in between where it got shut down and then brought back up. And everything in the middle associated to any of it was the delusional pain, self-hate. So I had to find some way to bridge that gap from 15 positive to 55 hopeful with all this crap in between. So I used image. I took a face, I found a picture of a boy who was comparable to my memory, who appealed to that memory. Then I found a face of a man who had a degree of appeal to me now, but still carried a lot of associative feelings. And I put them side by side. And I would look at the boy, look at what was safe. Then I would look at the man in the same place and then tell myself safe. Look at the boy, whatever felt safe. And I would look at the man in the same place and tell myself, it's safe, safe, it's safe, safe, it's safe. And I would do that back and forth. I would hold both images together. And all with the idea of trying to remap my brain in its connections, because the feeling of 15 and the feeling of 55 had this huge contrast difference that seemed impossible. That was like a barrier, like incompatible. They originate and are part of the same thing. It's just that this 15-year-old never was allowed to let it grow through his growing and naturally and organically come to the point of 55. So the visual image thing does, because it helps the brain through visual. And keep in mind, too, that everything you do, to see, to write, to speak, impresses upon the brain. So affirmations spoken out loud as you look at yourself in the mirror, I would look at Louise Hay for that kind of stuff. She was fond of the mirror and talking to yourself in the mirror, because it allows you to take your image, hear your voice, and to bring those ideas within you, and that impresses more multidimensionally upon yourself, instead of just sitting there thinking to yourself, I'm a good person, I'm a good person. No, look at yourself in the mirror. Look into your eyes in the mirror and tell yourself that you love yourself. Oh, you'll feel it, the resistance to it, but just keep putting the compassion around and repeat that periodically as just an exercise. And don't worry about the result. Just focus on the compassion, focus on your face and your eyes, and you'll find too in time that how you see yourself in the mirror will change, because you spent forever picking your face apart with all the self-hate and the lack of worth. There are a lot of subtleties in this that we don't realize, but by working on the subtleties in this simplistic way, you start to erode the patterns, you start to alter, and that cut that sentence off. I want to speak a little bit on perseverance. Again, I say, after the break in 2019, that first year was nothing but intense and confusing. And there were so many times where it seemed pointless, like it wasn't, nothing that was happening, and it just seemed like it would never end. I don't know how many times my wife had to tell me that I had kids and grandkids who still needed me. You have to keep looking at the light, that point of light. When I started this 20-something years ago, it essentially was like being in a dark and tangled forest with a point of light up ahead. And you just knew that that light was where you needed to go. And you didn't know how long it would take, or how far it was. You just kept looking at that light and kept telling yourself to keep going, because it will get better. I did that for 20-some odd years. And it's true. You just keep looking at that point of light, that hope, that belief, that faith, that it will. Because what often happens is you'll start to feel better, and then suddenly you'll backslide. But every time you make a shift within yourself, it's going to shift perceptions and what comes to the forefront. And sometimes you'll find that after you make a shift in a positive direction, something else comes to the forefront. Now you have to grapple with that for a bit. You'll grapple with that for a bit, and it might not seem to do anything. But you've grappled with it, and it kind of goes away. And then you'll be working through some other things, and suddenly you'll realize that it was a piece. And then suddenly everything snaps back into a better. And then you feel like you've been propelled forward even more. So it's a phrase I heard a long time ago that I connected with. It's a ragged army on the march. The front lines are fluctuating always, but you're always in the general direction of moving forward. So you got to have faith. Self-care is so important. Don't force yourself to be in a position of hurt just because of your ego, your pride, or the idea that you're just weak, or you don't deserve to be happy or comfortable. Make yourself comfortable as you can possibly make yourself. Put yourself in the position of enjoying any and everything that you could possibly enjoy, even if it's as simple as doodling on a pad, watching a television show that you adore, or being in the presence of somebody that makes you feel good. But self-care is important every day. Look for the things that you can do to make your life easier for you, because you deserve it. You've been fighting and struggling with this. So now you get the compensation. You get to give to yourself all the comfort, all the understanding, all the forgiveness, all the love that you can possibly give to yourself, because you've been giving it away in pain for so long. Now you deserve to give it to yourself. And I can't even remember why I started that. Often happens with me. I'm just hoping I'm covering all the bases that I wanted to cover, because this is getting long. Wow, 40 minutes. I think we're going to have to quit for now.